listening to the Fighting Families podcast with Preston Cave. We are in a spiritual battle, and we have a real enemy. That enemy is not our family. It's the goal of this podcast to help you fight for the family. And now, welcome your host, the Mission and Discipleship Coordinator for TBM, Preston Cave.
Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Fighting Families podcast. My name is Preston Cave and I'm your host. And today we have special guests with us. We have two special guests with us. We have Allen and Amy Frans coming to us all the way from Round Rock, Texas. So Allen, Amy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having us, Preston.
Oh man, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And you know, when we think about fighting families, there's always that concept of fighting for our family and not fighting against our family. And when I heard y'all's story, it was exactly what the Fighting Families is really all about. And so I thought, man, we really need to let more people hear your story of redemption, because it's just a beautiful and powerful story. Every time I listen to it, it chokes me up. I can feel the power and I can feel God moving and what he has done in your life. And I just think that it's just too powerful to stay quiet about. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. Now, you guys know this, that, you know, in America today, because of sin, man, the world is just broken. You know, creation is broken because of sin. But when we look at marriages and we look at families, it's just messy. It's really just a messy endeavor for us to try to be good husbands or be good wives and to stay faithful to one another in that sense. And so with that, when we were thinking about, okay, marriage, how can we strengthen marriage with this podcast? I could think of nobody better to have on the show than you two to talk about your story. So would you just be willing to share with our listeners a little bit of your story as we get started?
Yeah, we'd love to. So I'm Allen. This is my wife, Amy, and I'm the youth and family pastor at Central Baptist Church in Round Rock. I've served on staff here for 26 years as youth pastor, and I've seen God do some amazing things, notwithstanding the fact that he allowed this lady to marry me. Like I'm shocked. It just proves there is a God. When you look at me and look at her, there is a God that he loves me. And so September 22nd, 2001, we got married. Now, that's a date that may go, that's familiar. Yeah, we got married 11 days after 9/11. And pretty crazy to think about that. We had gotten engaged on Easter Sunday morning, or actually it was Sunday afternoon. And then we got married in September. And we were very worried that people weren't going to even make our wedding. My brother lived in Canada, and my best man was in Colorado. And they both got on the first planes that were leaving there and made it to our wedding. And it was an incredible day to have something so special after something so tragic. And thinking the worst thing that ever happened in American history in our time is 9/11 and the devastation that took place, thinking I'm glad we'll never have to experience anything like that. However, 10 years later in 2011, I kind of had to face my own 9/11 moment, and I'll let Amy kind of share a little bit.
Yeah, so on April 24th, 2011, which happened to be Easter Sunday, so it was the 10-year anniversary of us being engaged at that point. Allen found out that evening from something that he had seen on social media that afternoon that kind of triggered him. He found out that I was having an affair. And over several long hours that night and a very reluctant confession on my part, he found out that over the 6 years at that point, the previous 6 years or so, I had a total of 3 affairs. And obviously I was in a very dark place. I had some wrong thinking about myself from some experiences I'd had in high school and just lies that I believed about myself that through counseling and stuff that came on the heels of that, I was able to work through. But I was searching for something to comfort wounds in me that I didn't even know that I had. And so I was looking for validation and attention from other men, not my husband, because he had to say all those things to me. And these other strangers didn't. And so somehow it meant more coming from them than it did from my own husband. And so every time, it was not something that I was seeking out. and so I was really battling with myself. I was really battling with knowing, I mean, I was a believer. I am a believer. I gave my life to the Lord when I was, in elementary school. And so I was struggling with doing the things that I didn't want to do. Like, Paul says, I do the things I don't want to do, and I'm not doing the things I know I should be doing. And so it was just a constant battle for me. And I was wanting to confess. I was wanting to tell somebody, but my husband being a pastor, what are people going to think of me if they know I'm struggling with this and having this sin, this issue that keeps happening. And so I was just drowning because I kept trying to stop. I kept trying to fix it on my own and wasn't fixing it. I couldn't Bible study it away. I couldn't pray it away. I couldn't do the right things that I'd grown up learning in the church that I needed to be doing. None of that was fixing this problem I had. So I just kept drowning and trying to fix it, and it wasn't working.
It's interesting that you say what you say about that, because this video, although we're talking about marriage and we're talking about how to overcome the challenges of infidelity in the marriage or whatever, this is a much more applicable video than just to marriage. It's to life and all of life, because you talk about being a Christian at an early age. You talk about knowing what you should do, and you talk about the conviction that you had, the spiritual battle that was going through. I think that every listener here today, whether we have dealt with an infidelity or even some people who aren't even married, they know what you're talking about with the spiritual battle. So can you just kind of talk a little bit more about that struggle that you had, the spiritual battle that you had, and really kind of a little bit of like, what was the tipping point for you that really allowed God to finally get into your life and into the struggle of your life?
So as I had said, there were 3 separate relationships that I had had. The first one, actually, I had confessed to him. It was more, it wasn't emotional, it was physical, but it was more flirting and inappropriate conversation than it was anything beyond that. And so years before, we had gone to, we were at a marriage retreat, and they had challenged us, if you have any unconfessed sin towards your spouse, share that with them. And so I had told him about that. That was the only one at that point that had happened. Our kids were really young at that point. And so I confessed that to him. I told him it would never happen again. I believed it.
So did
I meant it when I said it. It would never happen again. And so we just kind of moved on. We never dealt with that. And so then it happened a couple more times. And so clearly this was a pattern. Like I said, this was not something that I was in my own strength able to stop doing, but I didn't dare tell anybody that I was having this issue. My dad at that time was the worship pastor at our church. So I'm a pastor's kid and a pastor's wife. And so I had this image that I felt like I needed to kind of live up to. And so the Sunday that he found out, that Easter Sunday, I had gone and met up with my AP, my affair partner, that Thursday. And it was on the way home that night that the Lord just hit me over the head with what I was doing and the reality of I am powerless to stop this on my own. And I was done. Like I was done fighting. I was done living this way. And so I pulled over on the side of the road. I was on Mopac Expressway in Austin, and I pulled over and I just cried. And I literally in my car cried out to the Lord, and I said, "You're going to have to stop this. I can't stop on my own. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what that looks like, but you're going to have to make this stop." And that was on a Thursday. And so it was that Sunday that Allen caught me. And so then began the confession and the figuring out, counseling and getting handles on it. But the tipping point was just my realization that this is a pattern. I'm not going to be able to stop this on my own. And I didn't want to keep doing it. I was so tired of trying to stop and not being able to stop.
It's interesting because I've heard, and we all experience this. So I'm not just saying that I've heard this, but I've experienced it too, that when you become a Christian, no matter what your age, the Spirit now is alive, and you now have the Holy Spirit living inside of you. And you do have this feeling at times where you are two different people, right? And so like the times whenever you're really struggling with sin or whatever it may be, or those times you feel like you're almost schizophrenic in a sense, like you have this one desire, and that's what kind of Paul talked about in Romans: the things I want to do, I don't do; the things I don't want to do, these are the very things that I do. And the world doesn't understand that. The world doesn't understand how somebody who claims to be a Christian can also struggle with certain things, no matter what that struggle is. And I think it's helpful for you to be able to articulate it that way, because you really helped me, and I know hopefully our listeners, understand this struggle. Another thing that you said that I really want to point out is um, you were a churchgoer and you were a pastor's kid. And something that we forget too often is that pastors and pastors' families, they struggle with sin just like everybody else. And if we're not careful, we're going to put the pastor and their family and the kids on a pedestal that makes it so much more difficult for that child. And I'm first off just want to say I'm sorry that you grew up in a world, which this is just what we all grew up with, a world that is a church world that sometimes misses the point of ministering to the kiddos as well. So I just wanted to point that out. And listener, if you're here, you're watching this video, or you're listening to this podcast, I'm going to challenge you right now to stop and pray for your pastor and pray for your pastor's family, because they're humans too. You struggle with things, they struggle with things as well. And the sad truth is, just like what Amy had shared, um, pastors and pastors' kids sometimes don't know where to go to confess this, and so it tends to bottle up. And that's what it sounds like that's what happened with you, Amy, is that it just kept bottling up to the point where you didn't know where to go. And you got to a point where you said, I'm done struggling with this. I'm tired of this. So God help me. And, interestingly enough, you probably wouldn't have wanted God to reveal it the way that he did, right? God has a way of answering our prayers, but in a different way than we wanted him to. So I did want to say that before we continued. So what happened next? So the Sunday, Easter Sunday, Allen finds out. So continue that story.
So at that point, I really, as odd as it may sound, I felt a freedom, because this weight that I had been carrying with me for 6+ years at that point had been lifted off. And I was ashamed and embarrassed, and I was hurt because of what I was putting him through. I mean, I felt all those emotions as well, of course, and was terrified of what was going to happen. What are the ramifications going to be and the consequences going to be of this coming out? But I had been carrying around all of that stuff for years. And so the problem now at that point is all of the weight that I had been carrying of my sin. I'm feeling a freedom, but it's now been dumped on him. And so now he's having to carry it.
And that night is the worst night of my life. Someone that you felt like you married your best friend, your soulmate, the person you can trust above anybody else, and to have that kind of betrayal and not see it coming. I had no idea. It completely came out of left field for me that it went on. I had been gone speaking at an event that weekend, and I got home late Saturday night after everyone was in bed, got up and did the whole Easter church thing, did all that, and the kids had gone to bed. And that's when it was a tweet that posted to Facebook. Nothing incriminating, but suspicious, like that's out of context and weird. And so I asked about it, and she immediately started deleting. And it's like, all right, this is a bigger deal. And that's what began the conversation. And so like she explained, the hurt, it just felt so heavy on me, and I didn't know what to do. I sat that next day, Monday, I was just numb all day long. I sat in my office refreshing her email to see if there was any other incriminating things I could find. I became a private investigator in my own head. Like, what do I not know? What did she not tell me? I couldn't believe anything she was going to say anymore. And I was hurting so bad. It's like someone had taken a potato peeler and just peeled all the skin off of my body, and everything hurt, every nerve, everything. And the place I would normally go to get help and comfort was the person that was causing it. And so it's like hugging a cactus, and all it does is hurt more. And so I didn't want to tell anybody because I'm embarrassed. And my thought is, am I going to lose my job? What are people going to think of me? Because obviously you're not a very good husband, or she wouldn't have had to go do that. So what did you do wrong? How did you mess this up? And blaming myself in all of this. I didn't feel like I had done anything that deserved that. But at the same time, I thought, where did I contribute to this? What was my role in this? And so Tuesday, I had staff meeting, and I sat quietly through that. And then afterwards, I went to my pastor and I said, I just need to tell you what's going on. And to my utter dismay and shock, which is terrible to say that, all he did was love me. I expected, well, let's get a plan for you to resign. And he said, you didn't do this. She did, and we're going to love you through this. And the church, because her dad was our worship pastor, and then my senior pastor, and they just put their arms around us and said, we're going to walk through this. And
Can I say something just real quick about that? If you're a pastor and you're listening to this podcast right now, can I just encourage you? That's the way things need to be done. And if you're just a church member, if you're a church member and you're listening to this, it's the same thing. We need to love on those, and we need to fight for the family and fight for other families, not condemn. It's so easy. It's so easy for us just to dismiss somebody because of something that they did. But to dive in, to live messy with them, to walk life with them, to help bring healing, that's what we're called to do. We are the body of Christ, and we're not called to dismiss a member of the body simply because that member may have a wart. We're called to love and encourage and to restore that. And so I'm so grateful for your pastor and your church for that. I know that we're going to continue talking about that. I just wanted to jump in to remind pastors and ministry leaders that might be listening, but also church members, that's what we're called to do. So I'm sorry, keep going with that.
You're good. And the church as a whole did not know at that time. It was just a few close friends and staff that knew what had gone on. And Mark is my senior pastor. He immediately connected us to a counselor, and his name's Rick Reynolds, and he runs a fair recovery ministry. And thank God it's based out of Austin, so it's close to us. And he got us in about 2 weeks after everything happened, and he found out and got us in. So we go in to see this counselor. And again, affairrecovery.com. I cannot recommend that resource enough for their articles and videos, and we can talk about that at the end with resources. But he brought us in, and Rick started this ministry because he had an affair on his wife, and years ago, and God had convicted him, and he needed to start this ministry. So he had us in his office and tell the story. And he says to Amy, he says, now you're a pastor's wife. Yes. You're a pastor's kid. Yes. So you know what the wages of sin is, right? And she said, yeah. He goes, what's the wages of sin? She said, death. And he goes, okay, so anything short of killing you is actually merciful by Allen. And I'm like, yes, he gets it. Like, finally, because I'm thinking I'm going to go in there and a fellow cheater is going to take her side and I'm going to be the bad guy.
Yeah.
But he validated my anger. He told me that it's okay to be mad. God gives us those feelings. In your anger, don't sin, but I'm allowed to be mad. And so my anger went from uncontrolled and unknown, and he just took it all down because he validated the fact that it's okay to be mad. And her affairs took place in two different environments, if you will. And that's something you always need to be aware of, are your environments. But one was at a local community theater. And then one was actually at church with another, she's on the worship team, and it was another guy on the worship team. And he said, now, two of your affairs were at this community theater. And and he said, well, I think it'd be okay for her to go back and do that. And I'm like, are you drunk? Like, what? And he goes, when she's 95. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll be dead by the time she's 95. So that's, again, so he took humor, not inappropriately, but very appropriately, to calm us down and get us to a spot where now we can think clearly and begin to get handles on the situation. And it was very, very difficult because this was happening, like Amy said, April 24th. So we're headed into summer. And I'm a youth pastor, and it's not like I can say, well, we're canceling summer because I still have to go to camp. I have to go to mission trip, VBS, all the things of summer. And I don't trust her for me to leave and go. And I'm sure not taking her to camp. Like, all of these emotions and decisions, and how do you handle this? And Rick was very good to help us get a travel plan, and he was able to explain that initially the goal is she needs to make choices that make me feel safe. And I kind of controlled the narrative in that, and I could ask any question I wanted to ask. And he said, there are no off limits questions. You can ask anything you want to ask. But Amy has the right to call the 24-hour rule on you. Like, what is the 24-hour rule? And he said, you can ask any question, but she knows what the answers are. And if she thinks that answer is not going to benefit you or help you get closer to Jesus or get healed together, then she can say, I call the 24-hour rule. Think about that question for 24 hours. And if you still want the answer in 24 hours, I'll tell you. But you're asking a question that could hurt.
Wow. That's interesting.
And she only used that a few times. It wasn't like she did that card every time just so she didn't have to talk. She was very willing. But that was a great safety tool for her. And so because I could start flooding and all my emotions get in the way, and I start demanding questions that I don't need answers to. I don't need to hear about the encounters. I don't need to hear about these guys. I need to hear about our hearts. I need to hear about healing. I need to, and that helps us set some safe boundaries and know you're not going back to the community theater. And yes, you're going to delete your social media. And these are boundaries that made me feel safe, and in turn made her feel loved.
I was just about to say that not only did it make you feel safe and start the process of rebuilding that trust, but Amy, I'm sure that it also, you talked earlier about how, being caught actually brought freedom to you. And I can only imagine that as those boundaries were being put in place, you also were beginning to feel more freedom. Does that sound about right?
Absolutely. I was willing. I recognized that I got myself in this position. And so I was willing to do whatever I needed to do to make him feel safe, even if it felt like a violation of my privacy or it felt extreme at times. Let me know where you're going. When you get there, take a selfie of you and whoever you say you're going to meet, so I know that you are there and you're with that person. To a lot of people, that seems like, well, why should you have to do that? Well, because I cheated on my husband and he doesn't trust me. And so I get frustrated. We've counseled with a lot of couples through infidelity. And I get frustrated when I hear the unfaithful spouse get this, this anger at, well, they want to know where I am at all times, and they want to check my email, and they want all my passwords, and they want all this stuff. Well, yeah, you messed up. And so the consequence of that is all of these things. And shouldn't you want to do whatever you need to do for your spouse to feel safe? And as there was healing, as we worked through things, as I earned trust back, a lot of those boundaries changed, and things have, we reassess and we tweak and we evaluate, and there's not as strict boundaries as there was 8 years ago, but there are still boundaries, and I'm still okay with those boundaries, because ultimately my goal is for him to feel safe. And he doesn't put those on me in a way that's, remember what you did and you owe this to me. It's not that. It's loving and it's safe, and we land on those things together. But my goal is for him to feel safe in our marriage, and so I'm willing to do what I need to do for him to feel that way.
And I think we could spend hours talking about what you guys just talked about, and how boundaries are healthy for you, and how we don't need to look at them as ways of reminding us of what we've done in the past or whatever. But my mind made me think of like just doing a simple budget. Think about this. This is not even marriage for a second. This is just finances. Doing a simple budget. Whenever we put those boundaries in place that we're only going to spend this much on this type of thing, doesn't it make us feel more free? Doesn't it kind of take the weight off, the stress off? And so that's all you're talking about, is that those starting to have conversations about the boundaries that you're going to put in place, not just for you, but for Allen as well, I'm sure. That just seems to take the stress off that when you have to struggle with a sin, whatever that sin may be, when you put boundaries in place, that actually helps relieve the stress of you having to live according to that struggle by yourself, because now you have a partner that goes along with you. And I think that if we're not careful, some listeners here today may be thinking that does seem a little bit extreme, but
full of thought because it comes back to perspective. And when you look at perspective, um, when I'm checking her email, and again, we made a commitment. We called it no shadows, no secrets. And so I have all of her passwords to everything. She has all my passwords to everything. I can grab her phone at any time and look at it. All of those things. And I even still now, that ding on the phone is a bit of a trigger for me because a lot of her communication was done social messaging and that kind of stuff. And so when I would do that and I would check her email, it's a perspective thing. I need to catch her doing right. The goal is not to catch her doing wrong. The goal is to catch her doing right. And every time I refreshed the email and there was no message from a guy to or from, there was no secret thing, a little bit of trust. And it may be 0.5%, but a little bit is built back. And over time that happens. And our counselor told us, the goal is not to save your marriage. You don't want your old marriage back. It was obviously broken. The goal is a new marriage. The goal is a redeemed marriage. And it's going to take 18 to 24 months to get to your new normal, that this event is going to make you stronger or not. And our goal is to see that it strengthens your relationship, but doesn't save the old marriage. It helps you find a new one. And that resonated well with me because I did want to catch her doing right. I didn't want to get hurt anymore. But as guys, anytime we get an injury, we get a scrape, we're always going to touch it and see if it hurts still. And that's what I'm doing, is checking that. And the less it hurts each time that I'm doing it. Does that mean it went absolutely perfect? No, there were moments that we both had. And so we had to find some new routines, some new habits to get into. And we can talk about those now if you want. But that was a choice that I had to make. When I got married, if I can just be as vulnerable with you as I can, my family tree is basically no branches because they're all broken from divorce. My parents, my aunts and uncles, my cousins, it's just there. And when we got married, I wanted in our wedding vows to say the words, "I will not divorce you," which sounds really great in a wedding, and that's going to be nice. My sole purpose for doing it was so all of my family members would basically hear me say, "I'm not going to be like you." And so we said the words, "I will not divorce you." And now 10 years in, God's calling me on those words. Did you really mean them? Or were they just show for your family because you think you're better than them? And I had to make a choice to not divorce her and to fight for her. And the most devastating part to me was the fact that she was drowning and I didn't see it, and I was living with her. And how could someone that I love so much and know so well be hurting so badly and me not be aware of it?
Mm.
She's a good actor. Yeah, she covered it up well. Yeah, she was deceitful. But my spirit did not pick that up. And that hurt, that my wife was drowning. And for 6 years, she was fighting alone.
Mm.
I had to make a choice that she's in a place right now that she can't fight for us. And I have to fight for us. And I choose to fight for us. And there's moments that I get tired and she has to fight for us. And now, 9 years later, we're learning how to fight together. We're learning how to fight with each other, not against each other, and fight for our covenant relationship and not just get through it. And a whole lot has been learned in these 9 years of that. But those were critical pieces early on. Am I really willing to fight for my bride? And how Jesus fought for me and how I cheated on him so many times in my life, and he kept fighting for me. She's worth fighting for.
And I think you're so right. The perspective is so true. Because when we put ourselves in the shoes of the person who betrayed us and say, well, I did the same thing and actually worse to God, and yet he forgave me, it really gives a new depth to grace, doesn't it? It gives a new depth to forgiveness and how much we've been forgiven. Amy was sitting here being double forgiven. She's being forgiven by you and by God. So she's experiencing a whole new depth of grace and forgiveness. But you're experiencing, Alan, you're experiencing a whole new depth of grace and forgiveness as well, because you're just being reminded, number one, how much you've been forgiven by God. But then number two, how hard it is to actually forgive, and how hard it must have been for Jesus to forgive you, you know? And so that's just, you're both learning this grace that you couldn't have learned any other way. My wife and I, we watch these shows every now and again. And this one show is called Love at First Sight. It's so dumb. I mean, it really is, but it's one of those shows that we watch just for entertainment's sake, to say, what are these guys thinking? Like they're getting married without ever meeting each other, and then they have 6 weeks to figure out if they want to stay married and all that stuff. And as we watch it, the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, they're speaking of wanting depth in a marriage without ever having to put in the effort to get it. But what you're talking about, this is how you have deep, lasting marriages. And so I love some of the phrases that you shared here. One of the things that you guys kept bringing up was the boundaries. And the truth is, a listener could listen and say, oh man, Amy, you really were patient with him for him to put up all those boundaries for you. That just seems a little bit over the top. But the truth is, you crossed boundaries that were kind of shouldn't have been unspoken, but were unspoken boundaries, and you crossed those boundaries. And so it wasn't that he was adding new boundaries; he was just trying to clarify the boundaries that were always there in marriage, right? So yes, all this is great. So okay, so we've got a little bit of time left. So let's talk about some action steps. Let's talk about some things that you guys learned along the way, and just say what would you want to share with somebody who is either struggling with something like this or has gone through something like this in the past, and their marriage is really on the rocks and maybe about to give up?
Well, to backtrack just a little bit, it was huge for me to hear him say that he was fighting for me. The difference between fighting against me versus fighting for me. And so that spoke volumes to me when I doubted my own ability or my own strength. And it's not about my strength, it's about the strength of the Lord. But to know that he was committed to fighting for me and for our marriage and for healing. And so something that I would say to somebody who's in the same situation as us, or even as me, and hasn't gotten to the revelation or the confession part of it yet, is we are not designed to fight alone, and we are not able to fight alone. I was clearly not able to overcome this or to fight in my own strength. And so I had to live in the freedom that God desires for us and to live the abundant life that God wants for us. This was not something, I could not have this dual life that I was doing. And so you have to confess it. You have to get it out there. Your marriage you are not living in a marriage the way marriage is created to be lived in if you're not being honest and being yourself. Your spouse can't love who you are if they don't know who you are. And so Allen did not, warts and all, right? And so do I trust? Ultimately, I feel like I was saying I didn't trust Allen. I don't trust him to love me for who I truly am if he doesn't know who I truly am. And so being able to be honest and lay it out there, and 6 years before I cheated, being able to articulate, these are my struggles, this is where I'm being tempted, and being able to even work through, whether it's with counseling or a pastor or somebody, to be able to work through the junk. And so counseling was huge for us. affairrecovery.com, the counseling ministry that we used, that is the one that started Affair Recovery, just to work through some of the stuff, like I said, way back at the beginning, wounds that I didn't even know that I had, and being able to recognize the lies of the enemy that I was believing about myself, and to hold it up against the truth of who God says I am and the truth of his word.
And I'll jump in and add to that. At our first counseling session, Rick said, he goes, all the questions you ask, there's one you can't. And there's only one. And I said, okay, which question? He goes, you can't ask why. Like, that's the only one I want the answer to. Why would you do this? Why did this happen? Why? And he said, that's my job to get to the why. It's your job to work on you and work on y'all, and let her work on her. But, and so I just had to be okay with that. And so if you're in this situation, You don't have to know why to start healing. You can start the healing process and get help digging down to the why. And one of the things that EMS or that Affair Recovery offers is EMS Weekend. It's called Emergency Marriage Seminar, and it's expensive. It's several $1,000s, but it's cheaper than a divorce. And so it's a weekend intensive, and you're there with other couples, which is another good thing to know, that the enemy's trying to isolate you if you're in this situation and you're the only one going through this and no one's as bad as me and da-da-da. It's just not true. You're not alone in this. And EMS Weekend allows you to go, and there's several other couples there, 12 to 15 other couples, and you go through an intensive weekend where you get handles and resources that give you game plans to move forward. It's not a quick fix. It's not a magic formula. It's not take this pill and you're good. It's do the work and you're good. And God is good. And that weekend saved our marriage in many ways, because we finally had some tools and resources, because I was going to act out of hurt. She was going to act out of shame. We were going to act out of anger, and that's going to blow everything up. And so learning those tools and resources were invaluable, and we still use them today in many cases. One of the big things was learning a new definition of forgiveness. And he gave me 3 definitions of forgiveness that I'm holding on to, and I would really encourage you for any situation, not just infidelity. One is forgiveness is giving up all hope of ever having a better past. And boy, that makes such sense, because when we live in the past, we're missing out on today. And so you have to give up all hope of ever having that better past, because you can't go back and do it over again. It's there, it's done. And there's a reason the windshield is bigger than the rearview mirror. We're supposed to glance back, not stare. If you're staring backwards, you're going to end up in a ditch. You look to what's next. And so giving up all hope of ever having a better past. Number 2, being willing to pay the price for someone else's sin. And that's what Jesus demonstrated for us on the cross. He paid the price for my sin. And so, as Amy said, that big load of junk she was carrying around got shifted to me. And I had to decide, am I willing to carry that and work through that? Because that's what it's going to take for forgiveness to happen. And then third is forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. And what is meant by that is the person that you need to forgive doesn't have to ask for it before you give it. My dad hurt me in many ways as a kid, and then he died. And part of the reason I'm mad at him is because he died early, because he smoked and got cancer, and he died when I was 28 years old. He never got to meet my wife, never got to meet my kids. My kids don't have a grandpa on that side. Like, that's hurtful. How do you forgive a dead guy, right? No, it's a gift I give myself. It's choosing to not let what you did have preeminence in my mind. I move it to the back, and God eventually moves it out as I move forward. And when I take those 3 definitions of forgiveness, man, it gives me a clearer picture of, number 1, what Jesus did on the cross, and number 2, the strength that he gives me to move forward after something so devastating and hurtful. And so those that are going through this, you're not alone in this. Jesus is fully aware of what's happening, and he is there with you. He'll never leave you or forsake you. You don't have to be good enough or clean enough for his love to be there. And we've learned that through this, and that we're going to get some new tools to work together. And so be careful what you watch. Seems like every TV show has a plot line of an affair, and all that's going to do is trigger you. You don't need that stuff. Turn off that stuff. Turn off the online stuff. So be careful what you watch and listen to. 1. 2, replace that with something else. Amy and I had lost the ability just to talk. Everything was about the kids or about something else. And so we went online and bought a chat pack. It's just discussion starting questions. And we would use that in the car. We would use that at dinner and have those conversations and learn how to talk again when we were dating. Learn how to have those conversations that are just fun, that aren't always about the affair, that aren't always about the hurt, aren't always about the pain. And then we called it couch time. And so every night after the kids would go to bed, we had couch time. We didn't turn the TV on, and we just asked, tell each other your highs and lows for the day, which is always a good place to start. And then ask her, did you have any rogue thoughts? Did you have anything that took you mentally where you shouldn't have gone? So you can confess that. And did I have any triggers? Was there anything today that triggered you? Every guy she cheated with drove a Jeep, and I hate Jeeps. And when I see a Jeep, I hate Jeeps. And so that's just a little thing that's gone on. And so those were very, very helpful tools for us. And then we started doing puzzles. And that's something that we could fight together against. We're going to conquer this puzzle. And so we would sit at a table and work on the puzzle and have our chat pack. And it allowed us to re-engage in ways that TV had stolen from us, that kids had stolen from us, and we needed to take back. And so that was neat. And through that process, God gave me a really good word. And it took me almost 2 years before I could say the words, "I forgive you," to her. But when I did, I bought her a James Avery charm of a puzzle piece. And the way puzzles are designed, there's only one place they fit. And when you try to fit someone else somewhere else, it distorts the picture. And she was trying to distort our picture by being with someone else when she's with me. God designed her to fit with me and me to fit with her. And that puzzle piece is always that reminder that we're together.
Mm. Hey, Alan and Amy, I really appreciate this. We don't have a lot more time. I want to make some comment. I want to kind of reiterate some of the things you just said. And then I want you to wrap up the show with what you talked about in a video that's on your church's website of how God redeemed this. So I want you to share that in just a second. But just for our listeners, we aren't designed to live alone. Confession brings freedom. These are just some things I jotted down while you guys were talking. They can't love, your spouse can't love who you are until they know who you are. What an incredible phrase. It's our call to minister to our spouse first, because Alan, you had said, you're out ministering to people, but your spouse, the one that's closest to you, is sitting there struggling and fighting alone. And I think that happens more often than we want to admit. The why is less important than the who. You're not alone. Some new definitions of forgiveness that you've learned was giving up hope of having a better past. So stop living in the past and just embrace the fact that it's there. We can't do anything about the past, but we can live because of the past or out of the past. Be willing to pay the price for someone else's sin. That's what Jesus did for us on the cross. Forgiveness is a gift that you give yourself. These are all really good definitions of forgiveness. Be careful what you watch and what you listen to, because that will embed into who we become. Replace bad habits with good habits. And I love the couch time. Ask the highs and lows. Ask, how's your heart? What are you having any struggles? Do you have any rogue thoughts or any triggers, whatever? And then I love what you talked about. Find things that you can do to fight together. To even if it's just a game or a puzzle, you're fighting together. And I love all those things. So just with the few minutes that we have left, how did God take what, and I'm just going to say it, crap, right? Like God can take the crap in our lives and turn it into fertilizer for his glory and for positive fruit. How did God do that in your story?
You say it. You tell it.
Well, so I'll give you a couple quick ones. One, Easter Sunday is the day that I proposed to her. And it's kind of a big day for pastors in churches. And then that's the day that I caught her. And so she ruined Easter for me. The guy that she had the affair with, the last one, was a guy in the worship band that had done my Disciple Now. And she ruined Disciple Now for me. As a youth pastor, that's a pretty big deal in my life. And that's going to happen every year. And I can't just say, you know what, I'm going to take vacation for Easter every year. Like as a pastor, you just don't do that. And I'm not going to have Disciple Now ever again. Like these are not options. So I'm like, okay, God, you've got a year to figure this out. What are you going to do? How is this going to happen? And I'm nervous as all get out. And it's the week of Disciple Now. And that's what would come chronologically next. So the next year for Disciple Now. And it's Tuesday night. And I come home from work, and Amy's sitting on the couch with our two kids, and they're all looking at me, and I'm like, what's happening? And Amy says, Colby, my oldest son, Colby wants to talk to you. And he said, Daddy, I want to give my life to Jesus. And I said, no, I've talked him out of it before, and that's what I figure. If I can talk him out of it, so can someone else. So we're just not. And I could not talk him out of it. He was ready to give his life to Jesus. And we prayed in our living room, and he gave his life to Jesus, and we called grandparents, and we celebrated. And the next night was our Disciple Now kickoff. And all the host homes and all the kids and everybody was there. And I go in there, and before we start, I call Colby up on the stage and I say, guys, the best way we can start Disciple Now is with an announcement. Colby, and I gave him the microphone. He said, last night I gave my heart to Jesus. And the place exploded. Everybody cheered, and God redeemed Disciple Now. It's no longer where she cheated. It's when my son gave his life to Christ. And then I'm sorry. And then you fast forward to Easter. And Easter Sunday, I got to baptize my son on Easter Sunday. And it's no longer the day that I found out or I caught her or D-Day, whatever you want. It's the day my son went public with his faith. And I got to baptize him in those waters. And that's redemption. God doesn't take things and put a Band-Aid on it. He takes them and makes them new. He doesn't just say, I'm sorry, you have to deal with this. He says, no, I've already dealt with it, and I'm going to make things better for you. And I have 100 more stories like that of redemption that took place. Those are my two favorite, obviously, and because it's impacted my family so much, and my son is now a trigger of hope and redemption and healing. And those days are no longer blackened by the choices that were made. They're redeemed by the love of my Savior, and he's worth trusting.
Man, I tell you, that's just such a powerful, powerful story of God's redemption. And I love, if you want to learn the full story and just a better flow than this episode, go to, what is it, Central Baptist? What's the website?
CentralRR.com, or you can go to our YouTube page, which is Central Round Rock. And that has all the videos on there, and our story is on there.
Okay, yeah, because it's such an incredible story. Say that one more time, because you cut out.
In the comments when you post this, if you want.
I sure will. Yeah, I'll put the link actually below your picture right now. So, but yes, it's so powerful. So I would encourage you to listen to it from start to finish, because you share a lot of this information in that. But that is just the truth of the gospel, is that God can take what Satan meant for evil and he can turn it for good, and he can put redefinition, he can redefine the crap in our lives. And then if you're a listener here today and this has been edifying to you, and you think, man, I've got some friends or I've got some family members who could really benefit from this conversation, I'm going to encourage you to share this on social media, share it with your friends, share it through text or whatever. Hit that subscribe button, stay connected to us with Fighting Families, because that's really what it's all about. Fighting Families is about fighting for our family, but then it's about fighting for other families that are struggling as well. It's fighting for other fighting families. And Alan, Amy, you guys are doing that by sharing your story of how God has redeemed the brokenness in your life. And I just got to remind our listeners, you may be here today and you may be going through this right now. Maybe that's the reason why you clicked on this video or this podcast to watch it or listen to it. You're not alone. God is with you, and God can take even the negative and turn it into a positive. Just want to think about, if you're outside and, we're in the country, we're in Texas or whatever, you walk outside and you see that pile of crap. You could stare at that all day long, and you know what? You would have a crappy outlook on life, because that's all you're staring at. But the challenge, and I think what this story tells us, is lift our eyes from looking at the crap of our life and look up to Jesus. And when we look at Jesus, we then get to watch as he takes the crap of our lives and turns it into fertilizer for his glory. And man, I tell you, I probably shouldn't say crap on the show, but we're going to. But I think that's the perfect picture of what God has done in your life. And I would think that even though it was a hard time in your life for both of you guys, there's a part of you that can say thank you to God that happened. Is that not true?
I would never wish this on anybody, but I'm grateful for how it's redeemed my marriage and helped me understand how to love her well and be loved well. And so I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Well, guys, listen, I really appreciate you being on the show and your vulnerability to be willing to share your story. Listeners, if you appreciated this conversation, you think that there's somebody who needs to hear it, please share it on social media so more people can hear this story of redemption. I just want to remind you that you're not alone. Keep fighting the good fight of faith. Keep fighting for your family. And as always, I always say, just fight for your family today.
You have been listening to the Fighting Families podcast with Preston Cave. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes each week. If you like today's program, we want to encourage you to share it with your friends and family members. To learn more about the resources we have to offer, visit us at www.fightingfamilies.com. Until next time, be sure you fight for your family today.